Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of this wonderful conference, and thank you all for being here. The panel today is entitled Seeing the Sacred, From Vézelay to Today, and I'm very excited to hear all of these presentations. We'll do it as 3 presentations with Q&A directly after each one. So after each speaker is finished, we'll have 3 to 5 minutes or maybe a little more depending on the length of the presentation for questions before moving on to the next presentation. And our first speakers are Christopher Kelly and Ellen Ramin, coming to us from Vézelay. And their presentation is entitled The Transformative Power of Symbols in Vézelay's 12th Century Abbey Church. Christopher Kelly holds degrees from Cambridge University and the École Supérieure des Commerces. He worked in business in the city of London and Paris before turning to the artistic and social world. He coordinates global artistic and spiritual projects focusing on nurturing poor rural areas and deepening cultural exchange between France and North America. And Ellen Ramin is a tour guide and co-founder of the Maison de Visiteurs in Vézelay, where a multidisciplinary team is inventing ways of bringing the Basilica's inexhaustible heritage to audiences young and old in artistic pathways.
So, en guise d'introduction, a way of introducing us to this wonderful World Heritage Site. The beauty of Romanesque art provokes a shock. It triggers an echo that will be all the greater the more people are prepared to receive it and respond to it. The beauty of Romanesque art provokes a shock. It triggers an echo that will be all the greater the more people are prepared to receive it and respond to it. This is a quotation from Marie-Madeleine Dazy in her book, An Introduction to the Romanesque Symbolism. This is why a team aware of Vézelay's rich Romanesque heritage decided to create a space, which you can see here on the left, the Maison du Visiteur, dedicated to or offering introductory and educational content prior to tours. A dedicated space that would enable everyone, young and old, to prepare for their discovery of the site. In this way, to gain a deeper understanding of the extraordinary cultural and spiritual wealth offered by the splendor of Vézelay's Romanesque art and architecture. So this talk will be in 3 parts. First of all, Vézelay's origins and development. Then the exceptional architecture of light in the Basilica, followed by an example of one of the sculpture and the symbols written into it. When you enter into the Basilica, there is the space which was for the pilgrims who arrived, the narthex, and in it you see these 2 figures. As you can see, we call them the Big Ear family. They're called the Panotti officially. And as they say at the time, listening gives you wings. It's a reference also to the fact that Vézelay is a Benedictine monastery that was founded in 857 by a couple, a remarkable couple called Girard and Bertha de Roussillon. They were part of Charlemagne's court, well, later. And Charlemagne asked for all monasteries, as from his date, had to obey to the law of the rule of Saint Benedict. That rule, as you know, the prologue begins with, "Listen, my son, my daughter, to the ears of your heart and the precepts of the Master within who loves you." So much is said in that sentence. Bernard of Clairvaux, who is contemporary to Vézelay, will go further. He says, if you want to see, if you want to have vision, listen to what's going on inside. This introduces us to the Romanesque architecture, which is all to do with going from the outside world to the inner life. Just so that you could see Vézelay, what makes Vézelay so very famous in the Middle Ages is that it's on the path to Santiago. And if we look at this, the little map on the right, you can see that there are 4 gates opening onto the Camino in France, wherever you came from. One is in Paris, the second is in Vézelay, and there are 2 southern routes. This gives you an idea of the importance. It was as big as London at the same period. And this is because of what makes a place so important in the Middle Ages, on the Camino especially, would be relics. In Vézelay, the relics are those of Mary Magdalene. Oh, sorry, not this one. Her story will be translated into the architecture of light of the basilica. So, building with light over the ages, there's nothing new. Our ancestors have built with light. I'm sure you have examples that spring to mind. I'm English, there's Stonehenge. In Ireland, there's Newgrange. There are the pyramids. In Vézelay, there's the same art of creating dialogue with sunlight. In Vézelay, it's according to Christian symbolism. Because for the sun for the monk builders becomes the means of symbolizing Christ and the Word made flesh, his incredible encounter with humanity, the human and the divine in his person. And this is reflected in the light, the architecture of light. All through the day, all through the year, the interplay between sun and stone is remarkable. It is designed in such a way, you can see here, there's the, above there's the sun at the summer solstice, below at the winter solstice. When the sun caresses the stonework and the stonework replies to the clarity of that light, there is like a conversation between stone and sun. For the monk builders, it's a reflection of the exchange between creation and creator, man and God, for the Christian Christ. This gives us an idea of their mindset. They are rooted in the earth. Everybody tills the land. And at the same time, they are familiar, they see the stars. They are familiar with mystery. And that's why they have recourse to symbols. Our symbols are very precisely the way of linking 2 parts of the same reality. For example, a wedding ring, when one sees a wedding ring, one knows whether the person is there or not, that another person exists. So something very small enables one to know something very important. We'll go into that a little later with the sculpture, but right now, let's have a look at this remarkable play of light and stone. Interplay. Now, I'm not quite sure just how to make this work. Check. I don't know if we can have less light. Oops. The morning light in the basilica in the Easter period. The stone, the body of the church, is transformed by the light, image of life stronger than death. The morning light in Vézelay is symbolic of the light of the resurrection, of course, and one of her relics, they say, is in the crypt of the church to this day. Below Christ, John the Baptist, who was damaged at the French Revolution. The Romanesque nave, the beige, the brown, like in Cordova. The path of light, from shadow to light. The sun caressing the stonework at the equinox. In Vézelay, there's never been stained glass. It's monastic. The light in the north aisle at the winter solstice, Christmas, the divine light coming to encounter creation and humanity. The 1st of November, Feast of All Saints, flames of light. At the winter solstice, lighting up the capitals, the sculptures below and above in the nave. The path of light at the summer solstice for the feast of John the Baptist. The whole question is of awakening the light which for Romanesque man is within us, or the mysticism of Bernard de Clairvaux. We are before scholasticism, and so that is why to this day the power of Vézelay's light works on our contemporaries. Now we're going to take a look at the sculpture. The sculpture, the capitals are at the top of the columns. in the nave, it's in the nave and in the narthex. Just a small introduction. The symbols inscribed in stone by the sculptors of the Basilica of Vézelay in the 12th century are strikingly topical, reflecting life's unchanging landmarks in the shifting sands of contemporary society. Contextualized within the Judeo-Christian experience, myths, biblical stories, and those borrowed from the Golden Legend are the very material of some 120 finely carved capitals. The age-old wisdom of our civilization is carved into the stone. The many pitfalls of human nature are depicted with astonishing clarity, just as the innate grandeur of the human being that is subtly revealed. These Romanesque capitals show us the ability of each of us to cultivate the divine within ourselves, to grow in wisdom, and in so doing, to help develop the full potential of humanity as a whole. For the attentive observer, they can become precious indicators for growing in conscience, freedom, and personal responsibility in the face of life's challenges. A symbol, as you know, is a universal key that opens the door to our inner world. It marks out our path through life as a succession of markers along a path. Symbols awaken us to contemplation, inviting us to rediscover the source of life within us and to trust our own intuitions. They leave us free to embrace their transformative power. From time immemorial, artists have created symbols to express their vision and their relationship with others and the world. The symbols in the Basilica of Vézelay, sculpted by unknown artists 900 years ago, still speak to us today, whispering timeless messages to the ears of our hearts in search of meaning. So let's look at an example. Helen?
In a few minutes, I speak you in French, in English, sorry. It's better. And Christopher is going to translate me.
French.
Okay. Que voyons-nous?
What do we see here?
Deux hommes
Two men
qui travaillent ensemble.
who are working together.
Ils sont autour d'un moulin.
They're situated around a mill.
Celui de droite, de gauche en haut,
The one on the left
verse le grain.
is pouring the grains.
Celui qui est en bas, à
The one
droite,
below
reçoit la farine.
is collecting the flour.
C'est le moment de la transformation.
It's the moment of transformation.
La coque des grains va être cassée
The shell of the grains will be broken,
et on va recevoir ce qui est de plus précieux à l'intérieur.
and we will receive what is most precious within it.
C'est un processus de transformation.
A process of transformation.
Cette transformation est nécessaire.
And it is necessary.
La basilique de Vézelay reflète toutes les transformations nécessaires pour devenir une personne debout.
The basilica reflects all the transformations necessary to become an upright person.
Maintenant, qui est celui qui est à gauche en haut?
The one on the left, who is he?
On peut l'interpréter comme le personnage de Moïse.
He's been interpreted as Moses.
Il verse le grain de la première alliance.
He's pouring the grains of the first alliance.
Il verse les commandements et la loi dans le moulin.
The commandments and the law in the mill.
Celui qui recueille la farine
The one who's collecting the flour
et l'apôtre Paul.
is Paul.
On l'interprète grâce à l'icône. Il est toujours représenté
He's always represented with a bald forehead.
et le moulin a une forme de croix.
And the mill has the shape of a cross.
Vous pouvez voir la verticale entre la trémie et le sac.
We can continue.
Et nous pouvons voir l'horizontale avec le-
C'est bon, on le voit.
on le voit.
We can see it.
Donc nous avons là l'union entre le Premier Testament et le Deuxième Testament, le Nouveau Testament.
So we have here the link between the Old and the New Testament.
Et la transformation s'opère par le moulin en forme de croix qui symbolise le Christ.
This symbolizes Christ being crushed on the cross.
Le Christ a dit, je ne suis pas venu abolir, mais accomplir.
He said, I came not to abolish, but to accomplish.
Ce qui se tient au plus intime de la première loi
What is at the heart of the first law, the law of Moses,
se dévoile complètement
is completely revealed
par le don du Christ sur la croix.
by the gift of Christ on the cross.
Par son amour donné, il est venu révéler ce qu'il y a de plus divin, de plus intime.
He has come to reveal what is most intimate and divine within each one of us.
Donc sur ce chapiteau, nous avons la réunion de toute la Bible.
So reunited on this capital is the whole Bible.
Et nous voyons dans la forme
And we see in the shape,
que les personnages sont dans un cercle.
they are in a circle.
Le deuxième cercle, ce sont leurs mains qui s'accordent.
The second circle are their hands that are working together.
Et le dernier cercle, c'est le centre, le lieu du travail.
And the second circle is the center, the place of their work.
L'artisan a travaillé à nous émerveiller
The
Par une-
artisan has worked to enable us to marvel at
par une composition très précise.
by a very precise composition.
Et nous voyons dans ce travail qu'il n'y a aucune tension.
And we can see that in this work there is no tension. We have to finish because there was a lot more to say. You can just see it on the side, and because the capitals also have a technical, they're not only symbolic and aesthetic, but they actually hold up the arches. So just as a conclusion, what we might say is that Romanesque art and architecture expresses a vision of the world capable of shedding light on the changes taking place in our contemporary societies. Romanesque man was as much anchored to the earth as he was connected to the cosmos. The architecture and play of light in the old Abbey church bears witness to a remarkable knowledge of geometry, energy, and astronomy. Romanesque sculpture combines the plant, animal, human, and divine worlds. Through these images and the architecture of light, visitors are invited to rediscover their rightful place in the universe. Romanesque images are mirrors of the human condition. Through the power of their symbols, they link people to themselves, to others, and to the mystery within them. While each site has its own iconographic particularities, at Vézelay, the human being is above all called upon to stand up straight, to redirect his energy and passions towards a plus être, greater being. Thank you.
Time for one question, if anyone has a quick question for them.
You mentioned this was part of them cloister intact, and has there been any study of how the symbolism of the cloister might reflect or play with?
Sadly, the whole monastery was destroyed except for the church at the Revolution, quite simply because the church was used for collecting from the roofs water into great tanks which are on the side. And there's no water in Vézelay, so if they destroyed the church and if they destroyed the capitals, the whole thing would have collapsed and they would have had no more water in the church. So we don't know. Well, we do know some things, but we don't have the cloister anymore. Voilà.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Ralph Van Buren, and his presentation is entitled Keeping the Message Alive, How to Explain Christian Art as a Visual Memory of Theological Meaning. Ralph Van Buren is a professor of art history, architectural history, theology, and communication at the Pontifical University of Santa Croce in Rome. His research is focused on sacred architecture and the visual arts, including implications for theology and church history. In 1994, he obtained his PhD degree in art history at the University of Cologne in Germany. Buren also holds a doctorate in theology from the Pontifical University of Santa Croce, Rome. Publications and teaching specialize in the history of liturgical art, rhetoric of art, artistic reception of the Bible, and in the impact of ecumenical councils on church architecture and the visual arts. His lectures encourage students to combine both the visual and contextual analysis of artworks. From 2014 to 2022, he was consultant to the Pontifical Council for Culture. Currently, he is involved in publication projects that explore the visual and liturgical performances of presence, the impact of liturgical reforms in church architecture after the Council of Trent and the Second Vatican Council, and how pictorial and rhetorical arts can empower mental representations, especially in the 15th through 18th centuries. Ralph.
Thank you for your kind words of presentation. I am delighted that you have come. The subject area of my paper is Christian art, religious tourism, and theological meaning. At our conference, that which I also received, Living Tradition, this problem is quite fitting because it shows how, in a new context, an original idea can persist and be revitalized through change. Keeping the message alive, how to explain Christian art as a visual memory of theological meaning. That is our subject, divided into chapters 2 through 6. The starting point of this paper is that the Christian artistic heritage attracts visitors from all over the world, especially that of the Catholic Church. This public interest in sacred art is confirmed by the increasing inflow of an international mass tourism in important churches, museums, sanctuaries, or pilgrimage sites. In history, sacred art is part of the Church's artistic property. It belongs to the material and tangible culture of Christianity. This artistic heritage ranges from the 3rd century catacomb frescoes to recent church architectures in minimalist style. The Catholic Church holds a vast artistic heritage with a history of almost 1,800 years. Due to such a long-term experience, the church architecture and the visual arts are distinctive features important for the history and identity of Christianity. Communicating the theological meaning in religious tourism, The fact that today large numbers of people visit the artistic heritage of the Catholic Church clearly indicates a great public interest in the cultural performances of Christianity. But with tourism, there's a problem. Actually, there are two. The first problem is many tourists do not understand the original setting of sacred art, which has been specifically made within the context of liturgy, worship, and catechesis. Being unfamiliar with iconography, especially in a growing secularized environment, many tourists do not know the theological message, actually obvious. As a visual memory of meaning, Christian art is not self-explanatory. To decode its message, viewers need to take a closer look as well as have theological knowledge and personal experience. Only then they could interpret the intended meaning of sacred art. The reason is that since early Christianity, texts and images are connected as verbal and visual expressions of faith, especially when they refer metaphorically to the transcendent divine. Both texts and art communicate the same meaning of divine revelation. They support each other. This makes it necessary when analyzing and interpreting Christian art to regard the possible biblical, liturgical, and theological text sources. For this to work, the viewer's knowledge and the communicator's education are important. Tourism in general is an ordinary part of life nowadays, of course. Consumers are willing to spend money on travel even when facing financial constraints. This is obvious if we see its economic impact at local and global levels, which is constantly growing. For anthropological reasons and religious reasons and cultural reasons, however, the Catholic Church is convinced that tourist activities at Christian sites cannot be considered only from an economic point of view. For the Catholic Church, the perception of the religious identity of her artistic heritage is very important in the contexts of evangelization, at least in theory, as pronounced by the Catholic Magisterium. Part 4, requests by the Catholic Magisterium and shortfalls in pastoral practice. Research has shown that the Catholic Magisterium is well aware of the need for historical, artistic, and theological understanding in the hermeneutics of its artistic heritage. Since the 1970s, the Catholic Magisterium has repeatedly called for the communication of the Christian faith through art. Quotation, Paul VI, "The world of culture and the arts are open to evangelization." During the 1980s and 90s, John Paul II adopted this idea and tried to turn it into a major project for the Universal Church. In 2003, he urged the bishops in particular regarding cultural values, useful to contextualize them in the work of evangelization when we draw on or upon artistic and historical patrimony. This represents an effective pastoral tool. But in today's museums and pastoral practice, and here's the second problem, the theological meaning of Christian art is almost never explained. Information is mostly limited to formal and historical data. If in religious tourism, however, the communication systems fail to explain the theological setting of Christian art, it will only be understood superficially, primarily as objects of aesthetic pleasure, as a simple photo opportunity for Instagram publishing, or as interesting remains of the past that have little to do with the present. What is not considered then is that these artworks can also be manifestation of ideas that still affect us today, In art, we make sense of the world and what is beyond the world. Therefore, the Catholic magisterium continues to affirm the connection between theological faith and art on which the Church depends and to which she should refer. In 2006, when addressing the staff of the Vatican Museums, Pope Benedict XVI emphasized the pastoral value of their collections. The approach to Christian truth mediated through the expression of art, of history and culture has an extra chance of getting through the intelligence and sensibility of people who do not belong to the Catholic Church and are sometimes prejudiced towards and diffident about her. Those who visit the Vatican museums have an opportunity to be immersed in a concentrated theology through images by pausing in this shrine of art and faith. In 2004, the Italian Bishops' Conference noted that communicators of the Christian faith should be able to pull out all the stops of communication, verbal and also non-verbal language. In 2013, Pope Francis recalled that each particular church should encourage the use of the arts in evangelization, building on the treasures of the past, but also drawing upon the wide variety of contemporary expressions so as to transmit faith in a new language of parables. Using Christian art in evangelization, as Francis suggested, means explaining also the theological argument. In practice, however, only few institutions include theological ideas in their communication about Christian art. Here, it seems that the public opinion of most local churches differs from the published opinion of the Catholic magisterium. There's no time here to present examples of best practice at the level of museum, diocese, parish, or individual. However, I soon will publish the results of my research of such a best practice. Part 5, Iconology as a Method of Interpreting Art, Erwin Panofsky. To understand the original setting or intended meaning of Christian art, we need knowledge of its relevant sources. These sources could be other visual artworks. Mostly, however, they are texts. The reason is that sacred art is closely linked to biblical, liturgical, and theological texts, which are full of metaphorical expressions of theological ideas. Since artists, patrons, and viewers considered these texts authoritative, they must be consulted to interpret Christian artworks correctly. Since early Christianity, there has been such a close relationship between the visual arts and texts. This living tradition suggests that Christian art must be decoded with a method interested in both images and texts, each conveying the meaning of divine revelation in its own way. Erwin Panofsky has presented such a method. It is called iconology and helps to decode or interpret the various layers of meaning in artworks by using a three-step procedure. In 1955, Panofsky's book Meaning in the Visual Arts distinguished between three levels to describe, analyze, and interpret images or architectures. What means? The pre-iconographic description communicates only what can be seen. Secondly, the iconographic analysis uncovers the possible sources of the artist's knowledge, texts, or other works of art. And thirdly, the iconological interpretation evaluates the artwork in its cultural context. In practice, this works as follows. Our example is Leonardo da Vinci's painting, The Last Supper, located in Milan, to the left of the Dominican Church. Our pre-iconographical description, first level, detects in Leonardo's Last Supper only the visual elements. We see a gathering of 13 men around a table. It appears to be a controversy over money matters, because one man is carrying a purse and the other men are gesturing excitedly. Secondly, on the level of iconographic analysis, we try to recognize the subject matter. Our understanding relies on knowing the literary sources, especially the New Testament, where we also find names of the figures shown. Leonardo's painting is based on the Gospel of John 13:21, where Jesus says he will be betrayed by one of his apostles. The apostles react emotionally. The painting lacks the chalice, in accordance with the Gospel of John, which does not tell the story of the institution of the Eucharist, different from the synoptic Gospels. Therefore, through our knowledge of the textual source, we can interpret the painting as a representation of Jesus' Last Supper with the 12 apostles according to the Gospel of John. Thirdly, on the level of iconological interpretation, we recognize the symbolic meaning of the Last Supper in its cultural context. We can interpret it as a document of the Renaissance, a cultural movement in Italy, or as a document of the doctrinal tradition of the Dominicans, or as a document of the personality of the artist. So far, that was a summary of Panofsky's three-level method for describing, analyzing, and interpreting artworks. It is still used by many art historians today. It can also help tourists to decode theological ideas. Viewers need skills and methods of attentive observation, reflection, and interpretation. Conclusions. Christian art as a visual memory of theological meaning. Let us finish by calling for a change in the way Christian art is viewed and communicated today. Such a change is necessary because still today the Catholic Church evangelizes too little with its artistic heritage, although it is visited by so many tourists. The split between the gospel and culture is without a doubt the drama of our time. This critical remark by Paul VI in 1975 also applies to many practical problems in the areas of tourism and pastoral work. The problem requires a solution. Sustainable information systems based on high-quality content are needed. Otherwise, the visual codes cannot be decoded, and the potential of Christian art to mediate transcendent ideas goes unnoticed. And it is striking that despite the lack of awareness in religious tourism and in spite of the numerous requests from the Catholic magisterium, many responsible institutions and persons do not sufficiently communicate the theological messages of Christian art. What needs to be done here? And what does it actually mean to explain theological ideas in art? I will conclude with 4 arguments. They could serve as a starting point for our discussion that follows. The first argument is that sacred art mediates visually the presence of the invisible divine. Christian artworks are a visual memory. Their iconography is a visual expression of religious content. As pictorial representations, they rate among the oldest communication media of divine revelation. Since the late antique apse mosaics, the iconographic programs inside the altar area corresponded to the mystery of God revealed. Also, the large hanging crucifixes of the Middle Ages, along with the early mid-modern altarpieces, served as a mediated revelation of God's nature, actions, and words. Seen from the nave or sanctuary, these pictures could give prayer its orientation. Christian artworks can visually convey a metaphorical presence of the transcendent and invisible divine. Here, light as a metaphor for divine grace or divine nature. A second reason why Christian art should be explained in its original setting is the sensory appeal of original artworks based on their authenticity and physicality. This is both an anthropological and theological argument. It is a paradox. Even in the digital area or age, people queue up outside major art museums, such as the Vatican museums or the Louvre in Paris, or in front of large church buildings such as St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. Why is this? Wouldn't it be much easier to visit them online as digital reproductions at home? Apparently, authenticity is important to these visitors. They want to experience the original image or explore the identity of the real place. For Christian pilgrims to a shrine, of course, we easily understand why they would wish to worship at the original location. The sacred image or relic of a saint is right here. So this place is authentic. But why do non-believers also want to visit the authentic place? The sensory appeal of art is secondly based on the physicality. The materiality of artworks enables to visualize even abstract ideas or transcendent persons who are in heaven, not on earth. As physical objects, the artifacts, especially sculptures, give immaterial realities a quasi-corporal presence. In the logic of incarnation, the corporeality of the artwork makes the divine appear human. For aesthetically sensitive persons, authenticity and physicality are attractive and allow to engage with the artwork in a sensual way. It captivates the audience. However, the sensory appeal of Christian art is not only visual, it embodies also important meaning, theological significance in a material form. And here, in my third argument, sacred art is a fine spot of theological ideas. The key idea is, in his incarnation, God wanted to reveal himself visually, with a human nature and a personal face. Among theologians, since the late antiquity, the incarnation was the main argument for the fact that pictorial representations of the divine mystery are possible or even necessary for pastoral reasons or pastoral use. By the way, this is a post of my Instagram account. We could say that images of Christ or Christian art in general visualize incarnation. This allows Christians to depict and see the invisible divine through artworks, and inspired by the picture, also with their mind's eye, from image to imagination. Sacred images are visual media of revelation. They give the transcendent or divine a visual form. They make manifest and demonstrate something hidden. Sacred art depicts God, the saints, and the theological meaning of the doctrine of faith. Representing God, these images can serve religious instruction. But not just this. Christian images also praise God, like the anabatic upward movement of liturgical prayer. Insofar, sacred art is a visual response to divine revelation. It is a visual form of praising and glorifying God. Liturgical spaces and sacred images could be interpreted as an offering to God, as a visual expression of the Church's doxological prayer. For all these reasons, Christian art may be considered a source of theological reflection, an auxiliary locus theologicus, that is a fine spot for theological arguments. Academics, especially theologians, should be interested in this argument. Visual artworks can embody theological ideas or concepts. Works of art visualize what the audience can otherwise only comprehend intellectually or only imagine in their minds. Artworks can visually help to explain biblical and theological subjects. Good catechists and theologians know how storytelling with pictures keeps the message alive in the memory of their audience. Biblical iconography is an excellent example of this. Now our time is up. My paper is intended to call for a theological turn in today's approach to Christian art. By including theological arguments, its original meaning could be better understood. I recommend this change because it will ensure continuity with the original hermeneutic practice. That is, the living tradition of understanding Christian art will become known again. For those interested in this, I recommend reading this open access article which I recently published. In Cefalù, Sicily, we see that the artistic heritage is a sort of visual memory of theological meaning because it can concretize the mystery of Jesus Christ in a cultural form. Like sacred scripture or liturgical texts, Christian art recalls the incarnate mystery of Christ. The verbal preaching of the word and its visual presence through art in their own ways communicate the same divine revelation. They complement each other. This complementary connection between sight and word with memory makes Christian art meaningful for our intellectual life. The Church should be aware of the tremendous potential in this complementary cooperation between visual and verbal communication. It permits an efficient provision of information about Christian faith and identity, which can effectively stimulate the external and internal communication of the Church. Distinguished works of Christian art, in particular, can grant aesthetic access to spiritual meaning, empowering a culture of reflection and high-content communication. Just do it. Keep the message alive. Thank you very much.
One question.
Is the method, Panofsky's method, is that how the art was originally intended to be experienced as well? Like, is that something that people of the time, like in the time when the art was created, this is something that they were naturally inclined to do because this was part of the general, approach to appreciating art, and this is something we have to sort of relearn?
Let's say texts, contemporary texts of the artworks are an auxiliary means, a medium and source of information about an intended speech fixed in verbal forms, in textual forms, because pictures, visual art do not speak in a rational verbal way. It's a visual presence, a manifestation in a physical way. So you need to read many texts and decide which texts harmonize with the visual message of such a picture or sacred space. It's only auxiliary to use texts to know an intended meaning. This will not reduce the proper value of a picture, of architecture, because a picture is a capture, like a photograph. Let's say you have the Via Crucis, you have these 14 scenes, not the whole history is like in a film represented, you have only capture. And you imagine, with our mental images, we imagine in memory and imagination what happened immediately before and afterwards. So pictures stimulate our imagination. And texts are only helpful in the sense of being informed.
Thank you. Our final speaker today is Sarah Crow, and her presentation is called The Living Flame of Beauty, Modern and Contemporary Sacred Art. Sarah Crow received her BFA in painting and minor in creative writing from the Maryland Institute College of Art in 2013, and her MFA in painting from the School of Art of the Art Institute of Chicago in 2016. She is currently artist in residence at St. Gregory's Hall, where she maintains a working studio and teaches workshops on sacred art. She lives and works in Chicago, where she is also an adjunct lecturer in the Art and Design program at St. Xavier University. She has been commissioned to do original sacred art for churches and private clients throughout the United States. Sarah Crow entered the Roman Catholic Church at St. John Cantius at the Easter Vigil of 2017, and she has made private perpetual vows of consecration to the Lord. Welcome, Sarah.
O living flame of love, that woundest tenderly my soul in its inmost depths. These are the first 3 lines of St. John of the Cross's poem, The Living Flame of Love. Beauty is the light that shines from the face of the living God. Thus, I title this paper about sacred art, The Living Flame of Beauty. St. John of the Cross, in his commentary on this stanza, identifies the flame of love as the Holy Spirit. This same Spirit is the one who guides, protects, vivifies the church, who consoles and challenges the faithful through her living tradition, her sacred liturgy, her teachings, and her liturgical art. Sacred art is alive like the liturgy itself, as we saw in the beautiful architecture of Vézelay's Cathedral Dance of Light, the Abbey Church. It's constantly renewed eternal sacrifice. And as with the soul's mystical encounter with the flame of love described by St. John of the Cross, an encounter with the beauty of sacred art can tenderly wound the soul, igniting holy longing for perfect union with beauty himself. The Second Vatican Council's Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy strongly defends the primacy of sacred art. I quote the first paragraph of Article 122 in full. Very rightly, the fine arts are considered to rank among the noblest activity of man's genius, and this applies especially to religious art and to its highest achievement, which is sacred art. These arts, by their very nature, are oriented towards the infinite beauty of God, which they attempt in some way to portray by the work of human hands. They achieve their purpose of redounding to God's praise and glory in proportion as they are directed the more exclusively to the single aim of turning men's minds devoutly towards God. I would continue that sacred art's turning of men's minds devoutly towards God has the yet higher aim of leading him towards the summit of prayer that is contemplation, and its consummation, theosis, our ultimate union with God, so perfectly modeled by the Blessed Mother and portrayed in this image. I begin with this exposition of the telos of sacred art in order to ground our consideration of works of modern and contemporary sacred art, and to bring home the seriousness of the topic, which these other talks have done so well. The Church has always taught that sacred art is anything but accessory or arbitrary to our faith. In direct opposition to the Council's promotion of sacred art and her exhortation to, I quote, "Be careful to see that sacred furnishings and works of value are not disposed of or dispersed, for they are the ornaments of the house of God." In the conciliar and post-conciliar periods, there was a wave of violence committed against Catholic sacred art and architecture by the very people charged to protect it. The combination of this new iconoclasm within the Church and the contemporaneous rejection of figuration and the value of beauty in secular art institutions are only a few of the factors against which liturgical artists have had to contend. Those artists who have sought to perfect their crafts, to become literate in the Church's iconography, and followed their inspiration to produce great sacred art in the West, despite these obstacles, are truly heroic. these are some of the heroes, the artists, I want to introduce you to this morning. I focus on Roman Catholic art in the contemporary period because of the urgent need for the revival of liturgical art in the Western tradition, including much more informed appreciation and robust patronage. I further narrow my topic to painting and sculpture because these are my areas of expertise, although much could be said about architecture. The first work that I want to discuss is a positive and historically symbolic example of the Church's respect for and patronage of sacred art. They're so wonderfully expressed in her Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy. Giacomo Manzu's Door of Death is one of the doors to St. Peter's Basilica and was dedicated in 1964 after 14 years in development under 3 separate pontiffs. It's a great work, distinctly modern, which is also a powerful proclamation of the gospel. The history of this, in preparation for the Holy Year of 1950, Pope Pius XII held a competition for 3 new bronze doors to lead from the portico to the basilica. The St. Peter's Guide to the Square and Basilica explains that contemporary artists were commissioned in order to, I quote, serve as a witness of the perennial vitality of the Church and her capacity to awaken artistic inspiration in all ages. The artist Giacomo Manzu won one of these commissions. After a long struggle to fulfill his prize commission, Manzu eventually proposed to Pope John XXIII the theme of death for this door, which then served as St. Peter's portal for funeral processions. The door of death confronts the viewer with the gravity and absurdity of suffering and death, making evident the realism of the victory that Christ won through his saving passion and crucifixion. Like much medieval art, the doors are best read from bottom to top, revealing the progression from fallen nature to redemption. And to appreciate the scale, to see the photo on your left. The doors composed of 10 panels. The panels are arranged in 5 rows and 2 columns. If you can see this row, I will begin with from the bottom. Across the bottom is a row of 6 animals, both predators and prey: a blackbird, a dormouse, a hedgehog, an owl, a tortoise, and a raven. These animals seem to represent, on this door of death, the post-lapsarian plight of all nature now subject to death. In the row above, the panels portray various specific deaths of people and types of death, showcasing the inexorable violence and apparent absurdity of death. The bottom left 4 panels show death in various manifestations. On the left, the death of Abel, the death of Joseph, death by violence, and the death of John XXIII, who had become a close friend of the artist and who died while he was still completing the commission. The right-hand panel, which I don't have a detail of, shows the deaths of Saint Stephen and Gregory XII, and then death in air and death on earth. Above the 2 central panels, we have those Eucharistic symbols, the vine branches and the sheaves of wheat. I'm going to leave it with this image for a moment to show it in context of the images below, because the Eucharistic symbols actually form the door handles of the door. So symbolically and literally portraying the reality of the sacraments as the means by which the door beyond death is opened, and evoking the transformation of the violence portrayed below through sanctifying grace. Then above the wheat and the grapes, we have the crucifixion of Jesus and the Dormition of Mary spread across 2 panels. The Marian panel evokes the dogma of the Assumption with those figures from heaven and the upward movement of the composition without explicitly illustrating it, which is part of the genius of the artist in this work. Manzu signed the work with the imprint of his right hand on the inside. The secular art critic, Dennis Adrian, writes, "The straightforwardness of the conception is an admirable framework for the genuine religiosity of the artist. There is no odor of spray can sanctity about this moving complex." In other words, this is not church art that is designed to make the viewer comfortable or allow him to remain complacent. Rather, it is art that, as Pope Benedict XVI describes the effect of beauty on the soul, gives man a healthy shock, draws him out of himself, wrenches him away from resignation and from being content with the humdrum. It even makes him suffer, piercing him like a dart. But in doing so, it reawakens him, opening afresh the eyes of his heart and mind, giving him wings, carrying him aloft. On a personal note, I want to share a moment from my own journey as an artist and a convert to the Catholic faith. The heart-piercing beauty of Catholic sacred art, before I understood anything of the theology of it, and the liturgy, was what opened my eyes to the beauty of the crucified and the risen Lord. It's important to understand the profoundly evangelical and persuasive power of art, as well as the unique vocation of the artist. About a year after I was baptized into the Catholic Church, I went on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. When praying the way of the cross, I came to the anointing stone in the Holy Sepulchre, and I had a personal intuition that the church is the broken body of Christ, and that I am called to minister to my crucified Lord by anointing him with the literal oils of my oil paints. The vocation of the artist is as now as at the first decoration of the tabernacle for the Ark of the Covenant by those divinely inspired artists, Bezalel and Oholiab, a gift from and for God. I want to bring your attention next to other living artists who inspire me and who are currently engaged in the work of glorifying God by beautifying his body and bride, the church. Another Midwest artist, Joseph Macklin, is a painter of devotional images and church murals who lives and works in Jackson, Michigan. I became familiar with Mr. Macklin's work from the Catholic Art Institute Sacred Art Prize, which is an annual sacred art competition with an online gallery. Mr. Macklin is presently working on a mural for the sanctuary of St. John the Evangelist Church in Jackson. This is a wonderful illumination of his mural project for the sanctuary, which shows above the adoration of the mystic Lamb, inspired very much by the Van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece Adoration, and below shows the passion and crucifixion of Jesus. While influenced by Northern Renaissance painting, the mural in process is adapted to the needs of the church and the pastor's pedagogical vision. I'm going to show you some images in process. So this is the artist before the Lamb being painted. These are the lovely underdrawings, just as in those Renaissance paintings. There's that layer of drawing beneath the first layers of the painting. And then the first layer of paint, details of St. John, the patron of the church, and Our Lady at the foot of the cross, and a detail of Our Lady of Sorrows. And then above all of this, that communion of saints, including our brand new saint, Saint Carlo Acutis, and the others adoring the mystical Lamb, the throne of God. So, inspired by the Northern Renaissance, but importantly, this work does not fall into the trap of ahistorical nostalgia, by which I mean the all too common attitude that something is good just because it's old and familiar, whether or not it effectively serves the needs of the church, both small and capital C's church. This mural is a successful synthesis of the artist's expertise, the commissioned iconographic program, suited to the early 19th century Gothic revival architecture of the church. The pastor of the church explains that renovations in the 60s, 70s, and 80s removed the beauty originally adorning the sanctuary, which he now wishes to restore through this new sacred art commission. Additionally, Father wants the faithful to be edified by the painting, to make visible to them the invisible reality of what is actually happening during the holy sacrifice of the Mass, namely the saving sacrifice of Jesus and the adoration of the angels and saints in glory. Further, those saints are appropriately represented, being recognizable but not photorealist, joyful but not insipid. This, I know from experience, is a difficult achievement, especially when painting modern saints who are known from their photographs. The reason why the stylistic representation of the saints becomes a matter of correct theology, especially relevant in our photographic and digital age, is because the saints are sanctified. They're glorified with God, participating actively now in the beatific vision. If sacred art does not try to go beyond just the imitation of nature to communicate some part of this supernatural reality, it is doing a disservice to the faithful, inhibiting rather than assisting prayer. Another painting of a modern saint that I love is Saint Therese of Lisieux by Giovanni Gaspero, a somewhat controversial Italian painter. Gaspero does much work which is wholly inappropriate for liturgical spaces and creepy. However, he also sometimes produces incredibly sensitive and powerful portraits of the saints, like this one. The instantly recognizable Saint Therese feels more alive than any photograph. Her eyes sparkle. The roses and lilies in her arms are fleshy and luminous, bespeaking the very incarnate manifestation of grace, those innumerable real roses that so many of her friends, myself included, have received through our prayers. Like Zeuxis's birds, for any art history geeks out there, even the insects are dazzled by these flowers as they are painted alighting on the blooms. Most powerfully, the face of the suffering Jesus in the picture that Therese holds gazes up at his bride. Gaspero illustrates through this image of Jesus' face the power of praying with sacred art. Jesus' image has come alive to Therese, just like the statue of the Blessed Mother that in her autobiography she describes smiling at her in her need. Gaspero further creates a line of tension between that smiling, relaxed face of the saint and the suffering man of sorrows. Here again is a pictorial representation of the paradox, the mystery of our faith, salvation and sanctification through the way of the cross. As Pope Benedict XVI writes in the spirit of the liturgy, the image of Christ and the images of the saints are not photographs. Their whole point is to lead us beyond what can be apprehended at a merely material level, to awaken new senses in us, and to teach us a new kind of seeing, which perceives the invisible in the visible. The sacredness of the image consists precisely in the fact that it comes from an interior vision and thus leads us to such an interior vision. It must be a fruit of contemplation, of an encounter in faith with the new reality of the risen Christ. And so it leads us in turn into an interior gazing, an encounter in prayer with the Lord. The image is at the service of the liturgy. This is a screenshot from Terrence Malick's beautiful film, A Hidden Life. You remember the restorer of the church, the painter in that film, contemplating his vocation to try to represent the true Christ. In every era of the Pilgrim Church, God calls up new artists and commissions them to adorn his dwelling place among us and to assist his sacred liturgy. I think of great sacred art as being like private revelation. Just as the saints are given unique visions throughout church history to highlight some aspect of the eternal gospel, so too artists are given vision for their times. Every baptized Christian is baptized into the threefold offices of Jesus Christ, priest, prophet, and king. Artists, in a special way, exercise the office of prophet by giving us images that preach to our imaginations, emotions, and bodily senses to help us to enter into the eternal mysteries of our faith. And this is my painting of the Divine Mercy, Revelation to St. Faustina, really at the fount where I was baptized at St. John Cantius Church. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I'm afraid we're a few minutes over, so we'll end the session now, but I'm sure Sarah and our other panelists would be happy to talk to you further. And let's thank all of them once again.